And I'll give the word to our presenters. So welcome everyone to this SEFI at Work session that is actually a reading session. One of the chapters from the International Handbook of Engineering Education, and I think the lead editor is here with us as well, if I'm not wrong. So today we will be hearing Amy, Sarah, and Olga presenting us about their chapter number 21, entitled Educating the Whole Engineer by Integrating Engineering and Liberal Arts. I look very forward to this since it's one of the topics I do research, this whole engineer or this whole education approach. So I really, really look forward to hear. About practicality. So after this introduction, the authors will introduce themselves. I give the word to them, of course. They will have 20 minutes to present themselves in the chapter. And then we will have 25 minutes for question and answers. That will be moderating by me. So I invite you to raise your hands when we finish, but also write your comments, your thoughts, and your questions in the Q&A feature of this Teams. So without any more delays, I give the word to our, presenters.
Thank you, Ida, and thank you to SEFI. Hello, everyone. We're really excited to be here and speak with you today. We do really want this session to feel as much like a discussion as possible, sort of echoing the feel of a liberal arts classroom, perhaps. So the way that we're going to set this up is that each of us is going to speak for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have some reflection questions posed on the screen. If you can choose to jot down some notes or put something in the chat or Q&A in response, or just save those until later. And then towards the end, we'll come back to those questions and also to yours. So you can access our chapter with the QR code there. But otherwise, we'll just move on to the next slide and introduce who we are a little bit, because we feel like who we are is very much a part of how we came to be writing about this topic. I'm Sarah, and I come to this topic because all of my education, all the way through my PhD, is in the humanities. It's all in English or literature. Yet all of my academic jobs have been in engineering education. So I have a very interesting pathway into this topic. And I'll pass it to Olga.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here with you all, and really grateful that Aditya put this team together as we wrote this chapter. I was born in Greece, and so for me, liberal arts is at the core of who I am. I've always been trying to integrate knowledge in the context of engineering education. I've founded 2 engineering programs from scratch, both intended to sort of meet this vision of educating the whole engineer by integrating engineering in the liberal arts. And so really excited to be here, and I'll pass it off. Currently, I'm also at the National Science Foundation, so I will also say that. Pass it off to Amy.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon for many of you. My name is Amy Banzaert, and I'm the founding director of engineering studies at Wellesley College and a senior lecturer in engineering. And as I'll tell you, I come from this as integrating engineering into the liberal arts curriculum as opposed to the liberal arts integrating into the engineering curriculum in my current work. Very glad to be here and provide a different perspective.
Thanks, Olga. If you can move to the next slide. So I'll begin by kind of giving a high-level overview of kind of what motivated us as we began work on the chapter, and then what the chapter looks like on a broad level. As you've heard, we come from very different backgrounds and trajectories and sort of angles onto the question. And we've worked at very different institutions. And in fact, I think all 3 of us, as Olga said, have founded programs or been part, or even institutions in my case as well, or degrees related to integration, has integration at its very heart. And in that work, we've all seen the huge value that liberal arts brings to the field of engineering education. But I think it's also fair to say that we've experienced both victories and frustrations around our work in integrating these together. I think we were sort of, I don't think any of us set out on our careers to do this work, but really see the value in it. And then, as Olga said, Aditya put us together. So this kind of was many happy accidents and incidents that brought us together. We decided very consciously when we began work on the chapter that we needed to model the integrated approach in how we worked, because we wanted to walk the talk. We wanted to show that a marriage of liberal arts approaches to research writing with engineering design and project management principles can really add value. And sort of, it might feel different from perhaps the typical or traditional structure of an engineering education research paper. So we found that, like the work to integrate disciplines, that writing process was a conscious effort that required a lot of communication, a lot of openness and trust, as well as probably more time. The efficiency was not the top priority for us, but Aditya can attest we still met our deadlines. So we really did want to model the process of integration as we wrote and worked together. So the high-level overview of our chapter really begins with terminology. What is a liberal art? It's thanks to our reviewers. Maybe there are some on the call as well. And it's thanks to you that we were challenged to dig into that question from a definitional standpoint. We actually decided to focus less on what it is, rather than we focused instead on what it is like. So liberal arts, we wanted to say, here's what it feels like. It is a focus on both broad and deep learning for the sake of the learner, as well as for broader society. It's deeply reflective, thoughtful, inquiry-based practice. It has an emphasis on intellectual gains rather than professional skill development and preparation. It highlights a learning community. So this is often a smaller group of learners that involves highly active faculty and students engaging with each other, sometimes both inside and outside of classes. And we put that in distinction to sort of more typical traditional engineering education, really that emphasizes the skill development oriented towards problem solving for technical solutions within industry. So that's the distinction that we made. We also knew that we couldn't really spend the whole chapter defining what it is, but we felt that was important. We also needed to check our US bias. All three of us are originally from Olga's from Greece, living and working in the US. We were all living and working in the US for some time, and we know, therefore, that educational culture, which more or less adhered to a liberal arts foundation through all of the US universities, at least in the 20th century, and we knew that wasn't the case elsewhere. So we took care within the chapter to really think about that bias and how it informed and also challenged our perspectives. We then had to define integrated learning and what that was, how it was different from but related to interdisciplinary learning. So making connections between disparate knowledge, concepts, and contexts that strengthen that depth and breadth as a part of the liberal arts. We then trace the history of the conversation around liberal arts and engineering with examples from around the world. We discovered that for various reasons, the sort of perceived divide between the two has been kind of baked into the educational system by about the 19th century. But it is also true that since that time, and we could find most notably in the US, there were always calls for integration, or at least for a foundational liberal arts education for engineering students. We list a lot of examples about that and sort of contrast it to what was happening in Europe and elsewhere in the world. By the late 20th century, we found several key works prompting reinvigoration of the conversation around uniting these disciplines. And then the 21st century really began with an acknowledgement of the value of the liberal arts within engineering. We saw some calls to action, such as the STEAM movement and the Engineer of 2020, which was in the US. However, we didn't see as much formalized research on the topic. Potential research directions began to be formalized in the early 2000s, especially in regard to accreditation. And we provide a comparative table on what that looks like. So my co-authors are going to go on to discuss some approaches and exemplars and future directions. But I will end with, in the next slide, these questions that I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about. Is engineering, or can it be considered, a modern liberal arts? If we frame it that way, how could it enrich or benefit the discipline? Alternatively, how might it constrain or challenge liberal arts and or engineering to think of it in that way? So we'll pause for about 30 seconds. Right, I'll pass to Amy now.
Thanks, Sarah. So now that Sarah has framed the motivation, historical insights, and context into this work, I'm going to talk about our distinct roles and then a variety of exemplars of integration of liberal arts into engineering education. Each of us has a distinct perspective. Olga, founding engineering departments at universities and as program director at NSF, has been studying and transforming engineering education with an emphasis on integrated learning. Sarah brings a humanist perspective to engineering education, integrating communications and ethics into engineering education with an emphasis on interdisciplinary learning. My work is centered on educating non-engineers to develop engineering habits of mind to better engage with engineering and technology in their future professions. This range of perspectives has provided us with a window into many different approaches of this type of work. And as we surveyed the landscape, we identified 4 key areas where the liberal arts and engineering education have been integrated. I'm going to highlight just a few of those, and there are many more in our chapter. The first category is single courses or one-off interventions that tend to feature design, ethics, and sustainability topics that largely stem from the liberal arts. For example, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, aesthetic and socio-technical perspectives were incorporated into a product design studio, while at Uppsala University, drama, including role play and performance, was used as a pedagogical tool to help engineering students understand ethics. The second category incorporates systemic approaches to integrating the liberal arts into engineering majors. We see efforts in Bachelor's of Arts programs that do not receive ABET accreditation, creating flexibility to include more liberal arts content at schools including Brown University and Trinity College. Another approach we see is dual degree programs where a student receives a BA or a Bachelor of Arts in a liberal arts college and then a Bachelor's of Science in engineering, such as at Monash University and Carnegie Mellon. And then, of course, there are the U.S. ABET accredited Bachelor of Science programs, such as at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which requires interdisciplinary projects across the 4-year undergraduate experience. Further, Wake Forest University's engineering degree deliberately infused liberal arts topics across the curriculum, incorporating psychology, history, philosophy, and policy, ensuring widespread and systemic integration. Guest speakers have been a particularly successful aspect of this program, allowing the department to pull in a wide range of perspectives. Excuse me. The third category encompasses efforts to provide students studying at a liberal art to experience engineering education in individual courses and/or minors. Both Smith College and Wake Forest offer minors for students outside of their departments. Wellesley College offers a set of hands-on introductory engineering courses taught by me as the sole engineering faculty member, which gives students a greater capacity to address the role of technology in society. The fourth category includes large-scale efforts to integrate engineering at the institutional level, such as at Harvey Mudd College, which has been focused on this approach since its inception in 1957. More recently, at both Olin College in the US, which opened in 2002, and the new Model Institute for Technology and Engineering in the UK opened in 2021, the liberal arts was deemed critical to the entirety of their engineering education approaches. In all of these four categories, much of the existing literature is largely descriptive, and there is a tremendous opportunity to study the methods and effectiveness of all of these approaches toward integration, including its impact on students. Further, clarifying how liberal arts content, such as anthropology, fine arts, and economics, versus liberal arts methods, such as Socratic discussion and critical questioning, impact engineering and is a compelling area for exploration. Okay, so as I wrap up this section, I'd like to leave you with a few more questions to ponder that I look forward to discussing in the Q&A section. What other examples of integration between liberal arts and engineering have you experienced or observed? What value or frustration did that bring, and to whom? And how best to define and study or differentiate successful integration? Now I'll hand it over to Olga.
Thanks, Amy and Sarah. So as we wrapped up our chapter and kind of moved from the sections that Sarah and Amy described, we also wanted to make visible the recognition that there's challenges and yet opportunities through those challenges. We noted examples of structural barriers that are holding us back and holding back our institutions to really break the disciplinary silos that exist. So that was a unique opportunity as we think about the future. What are some ways that we can move this work forward? We realize that we live in this university context where the silos and maybe resource constraints exist, and in the way that traditional curricular structures are built and deployed for the student experience. We also recognize that faculty development is a key area. It became visible that it's both a challenge and yet an opportunity. As Amy and Sarah talked about, there's pedagogies that are inherently in existence within in the more traditional liberal arts classes, and there's value in engineering faculty learning from that. And the other way around, there's opportunities where we're seeing growth in engineering classrooms where experiential learning is being used as a pedagogical model to, again, use that as a fertile ground to connect to liberal arts context. And so there's opportunities to knowledge share and break those disciplinary silos, and not just sort of learning outcomes, but also pedagogical approaches, and a commitment that we need to have to the faculty to continue to sort of elevate the work and promote it and reward it through the policy structures that exist. We also recognized, as Sarah pointed out, that accreditation and assessments that institutions and programs have to do become part of the vehicle. So we can either see it as a vehicle for change, or we can see it as an obstacle. And we would like to see that it's seen as a vehicle. And I'll just point a specific example there. You know, for me as the founding chair of Wake Forest Engineering, I had to make very explicit to my faculty in saying, if you look at the ABET student outcomes, which every US ABET accredited engineering program has to meet, there are 7 student outcomes. Only 3 of those 7, someone would look at and say those are explicitly for engineering education. The other 4 are really broader. They're talking about collaboration, they're talking about professional ethics, they're talking about lifelong learning. And so it's simply to point out that we can use accreditation standards to move the needle in the right direction and use those as vehicles to integrate knowledge across disciplines, or not, but the opportunities are there. We also recognize that institutional support is needed. So administrators play a critical role in breaking those silos, in promoting the commitment to this integration. And related to this, we think, that future research directions can get us there. So certainly right now in my role, at the National Science Foundation as a program director, what I'm seeing as opportunities, not only for this chapter and for what this chapter represents, but in a broader way, we need to scale up our efforts. Our chapter points to the fact that existing and effective strategies do exist, but we also need to scale those up. We've been having this conversation for decades and many years. And so it is time to sort of scale it up. And so we need to think about what are the strategies to scale this work so that it goes beyond one class and really reach the broader student experience that our students have at our institutions. And so future research directions could be looking at specific topics, whether it's ethics education or fill in the blank, whatever that blank is. It could be sustainability, it could be AI. I don't know what that topic is. You know, there's a lot of buzzwords that our institutions are using these days. Figure out what that buzzword is, but begin to look at it from a very interdisciplinary, integrated approach across programs. We think that's a unique opportunity as we dig in to figure out what does the learning look like? What does the student experience look like? And to do research on that and to figure out the right competencies that are essential there. Going back again, I mentioned this already, faculty development is not trivial. We need to give the faculty the tools, the mindsets, the strategies that they need to make these connections happen. I mentioned already that experiential learning becomes one vehicle upon which to connect the dots. And that certainly was something that I leveraged as I was building and leading brand new engineering programs. Experiential learning allowed conversations and learning to happen in ways that connected the dots. Improve institutional structures. I think this is an opportunity for us to realize that policies, procedures, the way institutions, the current structure of higher education is holding back these integrative approaches. And so where are those exemplars that we can learn from and maybe institute some better policies and procedures for promoting integrative learning? There's examples in our chapter and opportunities for that research to evolve. And we also recognize that research can take different forms as we move the needle. It can be in a more fundamental research of understanding and developing maybe a better assessment tools and integrating that knowledge. But it can also be more empirically driven, where we try something and we actually leave what learning was actually achieved through these experiences and what tools can really help us capture the development that students had in that area. And so I think if you look at the chapter, you'll see opportunities, and we encourage you all to go in that direction and help us move the needle. And I think that's it, but these are some of the questions that for this part that we'd love for you to pause and think. What opportunities do you see to achieve this vision of educating the whole engineer? What strategies can help mitigate the challenges that may be faced? And what do we still need to better understand and research in order to move in that direction? And here's some more questions, I think. There we go.
Yes, so we are ready to move. Yes, so 30 seconds past, that's it. Okay. So we have one first question from Paul. Paul, would you like to pose your question?
Yeah, I can do. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, I just wondered how you thought about the importance of physical space within for me that seems to be quite a sort of interesting thing. I'm more from Sarah's background, but I teach at a university institute of technology in France, where they love kind of machines and things, you know, and you go into that different physical space, and then there's suddenly at the beginning, when you kind of go into a different physical space, there's kind of like this, whoa, what's all this about? Or, you know, maybe for an engineer going into an art studio, you know, that kind of thing. And I wondered what sort of play you think that literally the physical space could or maybe should play. That was my question.
That's a really good question, Paul. And I will say that coming from a humanities background and being used to walk around the room, the nearly broken ankles that I've had from stumbling down like staged lecture theaters trying to walk around is really perilous. From my perspective, I think you're absolutely right. I would say two things to it very quickly, and I'll turn it over to Olga and Amy. But two things are one, sometimes you have to make that visible. And I've actually talked to students about that. Like, why is a space making us feel like this? Often something they haven't even thought about, you know, have a conversation about what the space is doing. You can even I've sometimes shown images of studios, or sometimes we've moved to another room just to sort of actually make that visible. And then they start thinking about their learning and how space affects it. The second thing I would say is that you sometimes have to just deconstruct the space and be fine with chaos. So doing a lot of think, pair, share, you know, sitting in the lecture theater, think to yourself, talk to the person behind you, talk to them, the two people behind you as well. Noise and mess, you kind of have to be okay with in some ways. So
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Olga.
No, I was just going to say it's a great question, and you're right. I think it has tremendous impact in the learning experience and the student experience. It wasn't an area that we explicitly talked about in the chapter, but it absolutely makes a huge impact. And the more we can, you know, cross, the more we can connect spaces and bring our students to really experience the diversity of learning experience, the spaces that exist on our campuses. That's a great opportunity. Maybe an easier strategy to begin to start doing the work is just co-hosting learning across the physical spaces that exist. Great.
Yeah, from my perspective, I want to echo the delight in this question. Thank you, Paul. And from my perspective, I've really focused on project-based, very hands-on classes so that we are often in spaces that traditionally would be a shop, but then they also typically have a seminar table, which you'd less likely see in a shop, so that it really brings sort of the liberal arts discourse approach and the ability to sit around a table integrated with the ability to run over and use a bandsaw or 3D printer or laser cutter. And I've found that very effective in ensuring that the engineering students have some comfort, right? They're familiar with their tools, but also if the discussion table is right there, then it's a natural space to use. And, you know, lecture halls come into it too, but I think the more integrated lecture lab experience with working all in one space that I've been able to achieve, I've found that to be the most rewarding space to teach in.
Yeah, I mean, the reason, you know, that I asked was because I've been involved in international relations and things like that for about 20 years. And I've noticed over the past few years, I mean, obviously there's been the COVID and things like that, but even before, I just felt that like students were like kind of, you know, they comfort themselves with physical space, you know, and that even if they go to a basic classroom, for example, that is in the technical college, and then they go to a basic classroom that's in the business school, but in it has all the same equipment, but it's in the business school, you know, and the fact that they've maybe had to cross the road to go there, or they've had to go to the bizarre place called the library, or stuff like that, you know, and it doesn't actually take a lot of change in terms of the physical space to actually kind of like disturb some mental processes. If you see what I mean. And that was really the sense of my question, because like, you know, when you've got, you know, we can maybe consider that liberal arts and engineering, I'm not actually sure that they're necessarily opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm not convinced at all. But you know, they're perceived in a lot of people, and even a lot of our science professors and you know, and or you know, it's a kind of engineering versus liberal arts, you know, rather than, well, you know, what could we actually learn from, you know, from each other. It doesn't all necessarily need to be about number crunching or about, you know, painting with colors, if you see what I mean, to be very stereotypical about it. But thank you for your answers. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So thank you. Next, Editia. I hope I'm saying correctly. Yes.
Hi, hello everyone. So, you know, we've been talking about liberal arts, which for me is about how do you like broaden students' thinking. And the question I have is not just because of what's been happening in the US in the past few weeks. We had this discussion at SEFI a couple of years back too, is like, how do we get some control over the narrative of what engineering and engineers are for students, right? Because at least where I am, it used to be Steve Jobs, now it's Elon Musk. I mean, these are the role models that drive the narrative. And for students, that's what engineering in some ways becomes. I mean, aided by the media and so on. And the more they're online, the more they're siloed in their filters. And it's very, very hard to get them to think about engineering in any other way. So, you know, I think I see that. And as Paul said, post-COVID, I mean, it's more, I think is much harder because students, even on campus, are not exploring spaces like they used to. They're not doing a lot of activities that they used to earlier.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll start. What a great observation. You're right that kind of who's representing, who are the voices, and what is the narrative representing, not just what it means to be an engineer, but what it means to really showcase where technology and liberal arts connect. You know, often I guess as an engineer, I have felt that my own experiences have simply positioned engineers as sort of this hidden profession. We hide behind the scenes from sort of policy. As a biomedical engineer, oftentimes the technologies that biomedical engineers sort of develop are hidden behind medical professionals. It's been this hidden profession, and yet it has gained visibility, and that visibility comes from voices that oftentimes don't often reflect what we want. And so it becomes now an opportunity and a responsibility we have to paint the narrative and to see the next generation of engineers and scientists to really be ambassadors of reshaping that narrative. And so I've seen certainly my role in building new programs as redefining, re-envisioning engineering through the fact that our students now will become ambassadors. And so there's a role for us to play. Certainly there's a role for the engineering professionals to play. But there's a role for our students to play. And I think if we begin to see those connections, it will further sort of our cause to paint a picture of both the strengths and weaknesses that become visible, and to use that as an opportunity for growth. So we need to learn through the failures, as we've traditionally done, but also elevate the narrative to point out the positive stories that come from engineers really embodying a holistic view of who they are and the impact to society. I'll just stop there.
Yes. Sarah, anything to add?
I was going to, Emanuela raised her hand. I don't know if it's a different question or if she wants to come in on this one, but.
Yeah, perhaps it kind of leads on to it, and Aditya's idea of, maybe the discipline. I mean, one of the things that when I think of the liberal arts and engineering, one of the things that comes back in my mind is epistemologies. Like, what are the thinking? What is the knowledge? How do these two, if I can call them disciplines, how are they different? Because I have a lot of liberal arts students in my classes with engineers. And even if you put them together, even if you try to bring some of the concepts or processes of the liberal arts into engineering, or even engineering to the liberal arts students, I think there is still a tension about these two disciplines. And the tension is, one is, I think fundamentally, the more we bring the liberal arts into engineering, the more we are threatening the whole profession identity of an engineer, right? Because we're from a position of a discipline, a silo. This is what we know. That's what's representative. And now we're asking everyone to kind of be more fluid in our knowing, understanding where our knowing is, and which is not a bad thing, but we are kind of, just like Aditya said, what is the narrative? Who are we looking to now? It's no longer that engineer that made the roads. It's an engineer that has the vision, that's bringing society around it, that has, the skills that are beyond just the technical depth and rigor that people rely on for engineers to make their innovation sound, right? So I think there's a critical tension here that if we are going to bring them together, which I absolutely fundamentally believe we need to, and you're right, Olga, I completely agree with you, because the IEP is the same. We're trying to bring engineers into a new space, I think, right? They are going to be in a new space that historically we're moving away from, not just moving away from, to be fair. Actually, there's plenty of engineers that still want to hold that space as well. So I think we're just broadening where we're going with engineering, and that ultimately is a threat to our history, as well as, we're kind of carrying new territory. So how do we then explain it? How do we then project it? But in the classroom, fundamentally, the approach of students that are on a liberal arts program, where they are literally giving themselves out to the subjects to kind of bring them together in a common space, is different than someone that comes from an engineering background that defines civil engineering as it is, and kind of has more of a knowing around that discipline, if that makes sense. Yeah. How do we, so my question is, how do we break that tension? Right? Because we all know it's there.
Yeah, these are some wonderful questions you're raising. Thank you. A few different thoughts popped in my mind as you were speaking. So one is bringing awareness to the actual history of engineering, that many of us, the three of us, even just writing our chapter, had some preconceptions about what the history really was, and we were wrong. That there was much more liberal arts content in engineering in various ways from very early days, for many decades, if not centuries. And so bringing that history in can change the narrative very much. Second, a framing I have seen a lot and believe is that when we're talking about the wicked problems that our societies are facing, climate change, immigration, really major challenges, a simple disciplinary approach is insufficient, right? We can't tackle it through a purely disciplinary approach, and therefore we do have to stretch in order to be able to work on these truly challenging wicked problems, brought in by UN sustainability goals, the National Academy of Engineering's grand challenges. There's many examples. Third, I often spend a lot of time in my classes talking metacognitively about what we're doing and why we're doing it, to frame it so that we're not just, presenting this content without providing these lenses, both historical and current. And then I also, especially when I was teaching at MIT, would avoid the language of the liberal arts early on and sort of sneak it in and then build it. So students would do significant reflection, but in their design notebook, and it would never be called reflection, right? And then midway through the semester, I might be like, hey, look what you're learning here. Guess what? Depending on the class, what the vibe of the students, I would decide how much to bring it in explicitly versus implicitly. But I think there's some creative ways that we can take those approaches to, sneak in the vegetables, if that's how they're perceived early on, and then bring it out to the forefront once they're like, oh, wow, I really did need some of that psychology to tackle this problem. I didn't think I would, but I do.
That's my favorite metaphor of the day, Amy. Thank you for that one.
And I think it works with staff too. You have to do with staff.
Absolutely. And in fact, Emanuela, that's what I wanted to talk about in response to your question was, let's not forget the staff's identity as who we are as experts. And I would say, especially on the liberal arts side, I sat in a humanities department at an all engineering school that just felt constantly oppressed. Perhaps unfairly, but looked down upon, not valued, so on and so forth. Humanities funding cut, and we're all familiar with the narratives. And so I think for a lot of, especially liberal arts faculty, to say, oh, now you have to be doing this stuff because your pure thing isn't worth it by itself anymore. It's all of that is really important. We actually consider that quite a bit in our chapter. It's to be very conscious of the fact that it's real expertise and meaningful collaboration, not just mentions and dustings of anthropology or history or something like that. So we wanted to make sure to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, if I were just to say, for me, the experience was opposite. I built engineering at an institution that at the core is liberal arts, and realized that they saw engineering as a threat. And yet it was engineering who was sort of constantly inviting the historians, the social scientists, the artists to join us in the engineering classroom with the intentionality to break down those silos. And so to answer your question really directly is that we need to attack those tensions with intentionality and try to break those down. And yet engineering wasn't invited to those other classrooms, right? And so I think someone has to model it, and which is why we spend time in the chapter to point out those institutions beyond just faculty, administration has a role to play to rethink its policies, structures, to break down those silos. And to Amy's point, the challenges of our society right now cannot be solved by any one discipline. And so if we don't realize that and sort of build that in from the very beginning in the student experience, then we're not doing justice to the graduates and our professionals that we're graduating. And to make those biases visible and to make those tensions visible. So I think we have a responsibility to do that. I've built engineering programs that are interdisciplinary, which means I hired engineers representing 12, 13, 14 different disciplines. I had to break the silos within that. There's silos within silos that we just must structurally begin to break.
Yes, Monsieur? You are muted. Happens to all of us.
Hi, I'm Mircea from Bucharest. I teach philosophy to engineers in Polytechnica in Bucharest. So I actually agree with you, Olga. There's an institutional barrier somehow because you don't have some kind of cooperation between different colleges, let's say liberal arts colleges and engineering colleges. And this is, I think, the biggest problem because I'm just one of few teachers that teach, I don't know, social sciences, philosophy, and so on. And this is too little. It's a big sea full of engineers and just too few liberal arts teachers. So what I think it's needed is students that are cooperating, institutions that are cooperating, such that engineering students can go to collaborate in liberal arts institution and in the other direction also. That would be, I think, a great change, and that would make a big difference. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I want to just follow up further on that. I agree with you completely, but also in our chapter, we really call for, we need people to study how that works so that they can talk about the effects that that has. Because what we found is there's a lot of descriptions of, people talking about this great stuff that they're doing, but the research needs to show what happens then as a result of that. I think that's one way that we might be able to convince more administrators, or I don't know, something like that to help us invest in that a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree that should be studies regarding this this collaboration and the effects, long-term effects they have. Also regarding the previous discussion about how do you sell liberal arts to engineers, I in fact sympathize with a strategy that's not explicit. Look, it's important to do philosophy, let's say, or other liberal arts. I sympathize with a strategy that's implicit. Let's do this. This is your project. Okay, let's do it. And then they just see that some interesting things are happening because they have a different, I don't know, horizon. So they are just they do actually need resources that are not STEM resources, are liberal arts actually resources. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have one comment / I don't know, question. Kritika, can you pose it, please?
Sure. Hi. So my thought on this was that using liberal arts with an engineer solution, there's so much beauty behind it. There's that example of Steve Jobs, going to a liberal arts class and learning about calligraphy and using that in his font usage for the Apple iPhone. And so that really appealed to users. And so you can see it firsthand how the integration between fonts and a beautiful engineered solution is just a perfect match, and where users actually like it and is aesthetically pleasing. And there's also value in looking at biology because it's aesthetically pleasing, but it's fully functional. Anything that you see in nature is just awe-inspiring, but it's also well engineered.
Yeah.
I mean, nature has been using it for billions of years, so
almost perfect, right?
yes, almost perfect.
Yes.
So I'm trying to tap into early education, and I'm wondering if the way to go about it is to introduce it to the students in the early education cycle so they are more open-minded as they go into their concentrations in college and actually look at it as a collaboration instead of, as you guys said, siloing into a specific niche. And that was my thought.
Any comments?
I'll just say that I recognize that voice, Kritika. That's a former student of mine, and which is amazing because yes, Kritika is an engineer working in industry and join this conversation because it shows she sees the importance of this, and you're absolutely right. This is not just a higher education challenge and opportunity. It's a rethinking of education, and at the K-12 level. And so if we don't explicitly make those connections as educators to help our students rewrite the narrative in their roles as they become professionals, that is where it begins. And all of us must model it. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think looking to the STEAM effort in the United States has a lot of examples of trying to bring in this type of engineering approach to early education. And it's striking, sort of similar to trying to improve gender diversity in engineering, trying to expand liberal arts and engineering. Seems to be a persistent thing that's been worked on for a long time with insufficient purchase. So it's an example, but it's not a check mark and we're done. So there's more opportunity for sure.
Paul, you had your hand raised, but your hand raised, but you lower. So
Yeah, it was only really one thing that when you talked about avoiding the language of the liberal arts, I thought about maybe not talking about soft skills to engineers because soft is untangible and they don't like it.
Yes.
And what with was it Emanuela? I think when she was talking about it, kind of like, are we not actually talking about like change management here to a certain extent, you know, and borrowing a theory from which I did. I'm in first year of a doctorate, but I did a master's theory on cultural intelligence, and why is it not developed within the French university context? And one of the theories that's been adapted is the dynamic resource-based view, where they talk about 5 different dimensions to bring change. The first one is strategy. So what is the strategy and how is that dealt with within the interested parties? The second one is resources. What resources are available, financial or space or other? Competencies, processes, which are things like the processes of alignment between sort of like, you know, in terms of the course content and in terms of vision, and also taking into account like the approach of the discipline or the disciplines concerned. I just wondered whether maybe the sort of these kind of more management type theories that are applied in companies, that there would not actually, whether there would actually be some use for that within the subject that we're also talking about this morning. So yeah, it's just a comment more than anything.
Is that okay if I move to Ewan for the sake of time? We have 4 minutes left, and at least he can make his question, and then we reflect if there's not more for that. Ewan, please.
Yeah, let's move to Ewan for the sake of time. You asked the reflection prompt, is engineering a liberal art? And my instant response was no, but I think it might be going to serve the same purpose, because the liberal arts degree was what a responsible citizen should know to make their way in the world 100 years ago. And then we let the lawyers take over, because that's the default setting for an educated leader of the late 20th century. But they find conclusions and go looking for evidence to back them up. They don't find evidence and then interpret it. And so I'm sort of wondering, in that sense, of as disciplines that are both founded on critical thinking, but it manifests very differently, is this integration going to lead us back to a different type of citizenship? Because I don't think a citizen of the world in the 21st century can be ignorant of the underlying science anymore. You say that SDGs, I think they all have engineering solutions, but there's none of them for which the engineering will be enough. And so is there a loop back around or an abstraction that may serve, that we're not actually merging them, we're just realizing they were the same all along?
Any thoughts? Yeah, no? For sake of time, now it's either.
All I will say is that is exactly what we spent a lot of time talking about as we were writing the chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to how we define things and how do we define the competencies that all our students should have. And I think it's hard to say that right now in the world we live in, some competencies that are technical and certainly are essential for all students. And yet, yes, do engineers need to embody these competencies that go beyond the technical? Yes, and that has been part of the conversation. You know, one thing I've learned in doing this work is that a lot of times, and I think Amy pointed this out too, is let's do the right work independent of what we call it. Like, I realize we have to define things, and that gives us a framework. So we need to work on that alongside doing the right thing, figuring out the right language to connect the dots for the audience that we're trying to reach. And we need to break the silos first. So we must model it in order for the next generation to do the same.
Yes, so I have 1 minute to close the session. Is that okay? And thank you, Ewan, for the reflection. I very much agree. I post in the chat for the next SEFI at Work sessions, namely the reading sessions and presentations of the chapters of the handbook. And I took some notes, but what I like to close is with what Sarah actually started. The writing of the chapter and the collaboration among the three of you implied a lot of trust, openness, and communication. And I think that's also what we have to take as a basis for any type of collaboration, right? We need to be open, flexible, adaptable, and hear, not only talk, but hear with open mind. So from my side is that I like very much also the comment from Kitrika about the beauty of combining the different perspectives. And beyond the space, the value of space, we also need to value the time. We are losing time in educating our students. That's also my reflection. So first year students, they need time to accommodate their transition. And that's where they all still come with open mind. So we have here sort of paradox, but I think that the value of time, they enlighten them for the value of what they can take and gain from this kind of collaboration and the integrated learning. So thank you very much, everyone. So that's my thoughts for the time I have. And yes, I don't have anything more. So we are on time. So thank you very much and wish you all a pleasant weekend.